Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something interesting, the Ping On.
Yeah, the Chinese criminal group based out of Boston's Chinatown.
Exactly. We're basically looking at their Wikipedia page, some related articles, trying to piece together their story.
Sort of the rise and fall.
Yeah, how they started, what they were allegedly involved in, who they worked with or against,
And how it all kind of unraveled.
and their impact, definitely their impact on Boston. Plus, you've got this founder, Stephen C. Sky Dragon.
Sky Dragon, yeah.
Arr.
That's quite the moniker.
It really is. And this whole idea that the Ping On were maybe a farm team for the Hong Kong 14K Triad.
That connection is definitely something we need to explore.
Okay, so the beginnings. Where do we kick this off?
Well, the 1970s seems to be the starting point. That's when the Ping On pops up in Boston.
Right, the 70s.
And you got to think about the context, you know. Boston, like a lot of cities then, was seeing big shifts. Demographics, social stuff, and that kind of change. Well, sometimes it creates openings, environments where groups like this can sort of take root.
Makes sense. And the main guy is Stephen Sky Dragon C.
He's the founder.
That name, Sky Dragon, it just screams ambition, doesn't it? Maybe a bit of, like, self-mythologizing.
Could be. He
Yeah.
sets it up right there in Boston. Predominantly Chinese group.
And they were active for a pretty long time, yeah. 70s through to the early 2000s.
Like a good run, yeah.
Yeah.
Decades, really. Especially in that world.
So what were they doing? The activities list seems extensive.
Oh, it is. I mean, you look at the alleged activities, and it's quite the range.
Like,
Well, the heavy hitters first. Drug trafficking, arms trafficking, serious stuff.
okay.
But then, like a whole lot more. Fraud, prostitution, human trafficking,
Wow.
illegal gambling, money laundering, extortion, even murder, illegal immigration too, and racketeering.
Racketeering, that's kind of the umbrella term sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, basically a pattern of illegal activities. Could be extortion, bribery, stuff like that, often used to control businesses, legitimate or otherwise. It really paints a picture of a group with, like, fingers in many pies.
Definitely shows their reach. But the connections part, that's where it gets even more intriguing, I think.
You mean the Hong Kong link?
Yeah, the source mentions, say, having heavy ties to the 14K Triad over there.
Right. That immediately makes you think bigger picture, international networks.
And this farm team idea, what exactly does that imply?
Well, it's suggestive, isn't it? It hints that maybe say wanted to build something significant on the U.S. East Coast, maybe acting as a feeder or a foothold for the 14K.
Without the 14K having direct day-to-day control.
Exactly. Like an affiliated branch, but with some independence.
Yeah.
It's actually not an uncommon model in transnational crime. Loose affiliations rather than strict chains of command.
Interesting. And they had local allies, too, the Hmong in New York.
Yeah, apparently so, in the late 1980s.
So they weren't just looking across the Pacific, they were networking closer to home as well.
Mm-hmm. These alliances are usually strategic, right? Expanding territory, maybe sharing resources, getting access to different markets or skills.
And the late 80s? Things were probably shifting around then on the East Coast crime scene.
Likely, yeah. So those connections would have been pretty important for holding on to power or maybe expanding it.
Okay, but then things take a turn. Say gets jailed, 1984.
Right. And it wasn't just for a specific crime. It was because he refused to cooperate with an investigation into Asian organized crime.
That's a bold move. High stakes.
Definitely. And it had big consequences for the Ping On. His imprisonment creates a leadership vacuum, obviously.
Yeah, you take the top guy out.
Right. But what's really key is what happened while he was inside. Boston, and Chinatown specifically, saw a large number of Vietnamese refugees arrive.
Okay.
And that influx really changed the whole dynamic on the ground. So when Say gets out in 86,
He's coming back to a different world.
completely different. The source says the landscape of organized crime was very different and not nearly as one-sided.
Wow. Imagine stepping back into that. A whole new population, maybe new networks forming, challenging the old guard.
Exactly. Territories disrupted, new players potentially emerging, maybe different ways of operating, different connections. It likely sparked a power struggle.
And this instability, this power vacuum the source mentions, that gets linked to something really grim.
Yeah, the Boston Chinatown Massacre. January 1991. 5 people killed in a social club.
Horrific. And the initial police thinking was related to this power vacuum?
That was the first thought, yeah. A power struggle turning violent. Seems logical.
Boston.com mentioned a theory about rival gangs fighting over the gambling rackets in Chinatown.
Which fits that power vacuum idea, right? Competition getting brutal.
But then the story shifts again.
It does. Later FBI investigations, according to the source material, actually pointed the finger at Ping An members themselves.
Wait, Ping An members carried out the massacre?
Apparently, yeah. Stemming from some kind of internal feud with a rival gang member or maybe a faction within a rival group.
So even as they were supposedly declining, parts of the group were still involved in extreme violence.
Seems that way. Suggests internal conflicts were maybe just as important as external pressures.
Yeah, and there's another piece here from the New York Times.
Right, the quote from law enforcement.
Saying that basically since the mid to late 80s, after C supposedly fled to Hong Kong and his second in command was killed, there wasn't really any real organization left.
Just smaller, more volatile gangs filling the space.
So the decline of the big player, the Ping An, didn't mean crime stopped.
Not at all. It just fragmented. You get these smaller, maybe less predictable crews fighting for scraps, trying to establish themselves.
Which can actually lead to more violence and instability sometimes, right?
Often does, yeah.
Yeah.
Less structure, more chaos.
So it's a complex mix. C's jailing, the demographic shifts, these internal conflicts, they all feed into the Ping An's decline and this reshaping of crime in Chinatown.
It's definitely not a simple rise and fall narrative. Lots of factors interacting.
And the notable members mentioned, besides, say, John Willis.
Yeah, John Willis is named. The source doesn't give us a ton of detail on him specifically.
But his inclusion suggests he was probably pretty important.
Likely, yeah. Maybe a key lieutenant, someone significant in the structure alongside, say. These organizations need a network of core people to function.
Okay, let's try and pull this together then. We've got the Ping An, starting in the 70s under Sky Dragon, say.
Strong alleged ties to the 14K in Hong Kong, this farm team ambition.
Involved in a huge range of crime, making alliances like with the Hung Mong in New York.
But then hit by C's jail time in '84, the changing face of Chinatown with new arrivals.
Leading to instability, maybe internal feuds, potentially culminating in their own members being involved in the '91 massacre.
Right. And ultimately, their decline doesn't end organized crime. It just changes its shape, leads to fragmentation, maybe more unpredictable violence from smaller groups.
That seems to capture the arc pretty well.
Yeah, I think that covers the key points from the sources, from their start through their operations, the connections, and then the complex factors in their decline and its aftermath.
So it leaves you wondering, doesn't it, this kind of cycle? Organized groups rising and falling in cities. What does the Ping An story really tell us about the factors that fuel that?
Like what allows these groups to emerge today or what causes them to eventually fade.
Yeah. And how crucial is that central leadership, the Sky Dragon figure? And how much do bigger societal changes like migration patterns throw everything off balance for these groups?
It's a lot to think about, how those internal dynamics and external pressures interact. Definitely something to mull over.